So I want you to try and picture a very specific sensory environment right now.
Okay, yeah, let's set the scene.
Right, so imagine you are standing on the muddy bank of one of Alaska's truly great salmon rivers.
Mm-hmm.
Like we could be at the Kenai or maybe the Nushagak or, even the banks of the mighty Yukon River.
Oh, yeah, those are massive systems.
Huge, right. And it is probably early morning. It's undeniably cold. The wind is likely just biting at your face.
Definitely.
And the ambient noise is just this roar, right?
Yeah.
Millions of gallons of water pushing toward the ocean. But what I really want you to focus on is the water right there at the toes of your boots.
Okay.
You look down, and you're probably expecting to see that crystal clear, pristine, almost bluish mountain stream. Like you always see in those BBC nature documentaries.
Right, the ones where you can, count the pebbles on the bottom.
Exactly. But that is absolutely not what is in front of you.
Not even close. It's a completely different reality.
Right. The water is entirely choked with this glacial flour. It is just filled with suspended silt coming off the mountains.
Yeah.
Honestly, it is the exact color and opacity of wet cement.
Wet cement is the perfect way to describe it.
Like if you were to kneel down right there on the bank and just put your bare hand into that freezing water, your hand would completely disappear before it was even 12 inches deep.
Oh, yeah. It is entirely opaque. I mean, if you took a high-definition optical camera, even with massive floodlights, and put it in that water,
You wouldn't see anything.
you'd record absolutely nothing, just a swirling, chaotic wall of gray.
Wow.
And yet, beneath that completely impenetrable surface, moving continuously, is one of the most massive, biologically significant migrations on the entire planet.
Salmon run.
Exactly. Millions upon millions of wild salmon are pushing upriver. They are returning from the ocean to their natal streams to spawn.
Which is incredible on its own.
It is. And to make matters even more complicated for anyone trying to observe this, these fish do not just migrate under the bright Alaskan summer sun.
They move continuously,
Right.
relentlessly, through the pitch black night as well.
Which brings us to the core problem, and really the entire mission for our deep dive today. How in the world do you count millions of fish when you cannot even see them?
It's a huge logistical nightmare.
It really is. So welcome to the deep dive. Today we are going to explore this monumental, honestly fascinating shift in the history of fisheries biology. We are looking at how scientists, river managers, and ecologists stopped trying to look for salmon and started listening for them instead.
Yeah, it's an incredible technological trajectory.
Right, Kate.
And I think it says so much about human ingenuity,
Yeah, totally.
What we're going to do today is trace this evolution from its very crude beginnings. We're talking early mechanical clicks in the dark.
Like barely a step above a blind guess.
Barely. And we'll follow the science all the way up to these high-resolution acoustic cameras.
Which is wild.
I mean, we were talking about devices that actually produce near-video footage of these fish swimming, fighting the current, and doing it all in absolute darkness. But as we know, whenever you introduce a shiny new piece of technology into a natural environment, things get complicated.
Very complicated.
Because there is a messy, very human fallout to all of this. Like what happens when these new, highly advanced machines start generating new numbers?
Right. What happens when the biological baseline shifts?
Exactly. And more importantly, what happens when the local fishing communities, the guides, the commercial fishermen, the indigenous communities who literally know the currents of these waters better than anyone alive, what happens when they start questioning whether the official technological count generated by a computer is actually the true count?
That's where the real friction is.
So if you are someone who has ever found yourself wondering just how much faith we should really be putting into automated centralized data, or honestly, if you're just curious how classified military mine detecting technology somehow ended up right in the middle of a massive Alaskan fishing dispute, this deep dive is going to be fascinating for you.
Oh, it's a great story.
Okay, let's unpack this from the very beginning, because we need to start with the fundamental physics of the river.
Good place to start.
Right, because before we get to acoustic cameras and AI and military tech, I am struggling to understand the basic mechanism here. Like, how can you possibly hear a fish in a roaring river?
Well, the mechanism is brilliant, and it is entirely based on how sound behaves in water versus how light behaves in water.
Okay.
As we established, light scatters and dies almost immediately in that glacial silt. But water is actually an incredibly efficient medium for sound.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. So fisheries sonar relies on a physical device called a transducer.
Okay, a transducer. I've heard the word, but what is it actually doing in this context?
Think of a transducer as both a highly specialized speaker and a highly specialized microphone combined into one durable waterproof unit.
Okay, I can picture that.
Right. So you take this transducer, you submerge it in the freezing river, and you place it right on the riverbed, usually near the bank.
Making sure it's secure, obviously.
Exactly, but instead of pointing it up toward the surface or, down into the mud, you aim it sideways.
Sideways across the river.
Yes. It fires a fan of sound waves horizontally directly across the river current. It basically forms a sort of invisible acoustic fence.
Okay, so it's shooting high-frequency sound straight into the wet cement. But if the water is full of mud and silt and glacial flour, doesn't the sound just bounce off all of that?
That's a logical assumption, yeah.
Like, why doesn't the machine just hear a wall of mud?
That is the genius of hydroacoustics. Sound waves only bounce back. They only create an echo when they encounter an object with a significantly different density than the medium they are traveling through.
Okay.
This is called acoustic impedance.
Huh.
So the silt and the glacial flour, they're certainly there in the water, but their density at that microscopic level isn't drastically different enough from the surrounding water to bounce back a strong signal.
Not at the frequencies these machines use, anyway.
Right, exactly. The sound just travels right through the muddy water unremarkably.
Okay, so the sound ignores the mud, but a fish is basically just water and meat, right?
Yes, and this is where it gets absolutely fascinating. A salmon's body is indeed mostly water.
Right.
So its flesh differs only a tiny bit in density from the river water, which means the sound wave largely passes right through the meat of the fish.
Wait, really? It passes through the meat?
Yeah. If bones differ a bit more, so they provide a faint echo. But the real magic, the absolute unsung hero of this entire multi-million-dollar counting operation, is a specific organ inside the salmon.
An organ?
The swim bladder.
Wait. The swim bladder, like the thing that keeps them from sinking.
Exactly. It is a small, gas-filled sac located inside the fish's body cavity. The salmon uses it for buoyancy.
Oh, I see.
It inflates or deflates it slightly to hold its depth in the water column so it doesn't have to constantly burn energy swimming up or down.
That makes sense.
Now think about density. Gas, air, and liquid water have wildly, drastically different density.
Oh, you see where this is going?
Right. So, to a high-frequency sound wave traveling effortlessly through the liquid water, that sudden, abrupt boundary between the water-feed flesh of the fish and the pocket of air inside the swim bladder.
That's a massive collision.
It's a huge collision. In acoustic terms, that pocket of air is blindingly, incredibly bright.
Wow.
To the transducer sitting on the riverbed, a passing salmon is loudest exactly at the spot where it is holding that tiny pocket of air.
Okay, let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. So we aren't really seeing a fish at all.
Mm-hmm.
When the state of Alaska is counting salmon, they are basically scanning the river for underwater balloons.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. You are hunting for moving underwater balloons.
That is wild. The fish is effectively shouting its exact location to the machine just by having a pocket of air inside its body.
Yeah, exactly. When the sound wave hits that balloon, a strong echo ricochets instantly back to the transducer on the riverbed.
And then what? How does that tell them where it is?
Because we know the exact speed of sound in water, the machine measures the microscopic timing of that returning echo.
Oh, okay.
If it takes a fraction of a second longer to return, the object is further out. That tells you exactly how far away the target is.
That's so smart.
Right. And the strength, like the amplitude of the echo, gives you a hint about the physical nature of the target.
I really want to emphasize this point for everyone listening, because every single piece of incredibly complex machinery we are about to discuss today, all the bitter arguments in the town halls, all the millions of dollars in military technology, it all fundamentally rests on this one biological quirk.
It really does.
Sound bounces off a tiny pocket of air inside a fish. It just rounds this whole highly technical topic in a very visceral physical reality. If the fish didn't have a swim bladder, none of this would work.
It really wouldn't. The physics of acoustic impedance haven't changed. A swim bladder in 1980 reflects sound exactly the same way a swim bladder does today in 2026. What separates the different eras of fisheries management is simply what the human technology was able to do with those echoes. Like, how did we interpret the bounce?
And that transition is wild, because knowing how sound bounces off an underwater balloon is one thing, but how biologists historically recorded those bounces and how they tried to make management decisions based on them is a completely different story.
Oh, absolutely.
And from what I'm looking at in our research, that story starts with a machine that was essentially just a blind turnstile.
Yeah, that's a very accurate description.
Let's talk about the 1980s. Let's talk about the Bendix era.
The Bendix sonar. If you
Yeah,
talk to any retired fisheries biologists in Alaska, they will have stories about the Bendix.
I bet.
It was the Alaska Department of Fish and Game's first major foray into hydroacoustics, and it was their longest-running sonar technology.
Really? How long did they use it?
We are talking about heavy, widespread deployment from the early 1980s all the way through the 90s. For decades, this machine was the absolute bedrock of Alaskan river management.
So how did it work? Was it drawing pictures like the stuff today?
Not even close. When you look back at the Bendix now compared to what we have today, its limitations were staggering.
Okay, tell me about the limitations.
First, there was the physical range. The Bendix could only punch its sound wave about 30 meters out into the river, which is roughly 100 feet.
Wait, 100 feet. But some of these Alaskan rivers, like the Kenai or the Yukon, they're massively wide.
Oh, yeah.
They are hundreds of feet across, if not miles in some places. Weren't they missing, like, an enormous percentage of the river?
They absolutely were missing a huge portion of the river.
How is that a reliable baseline for an entire ecosystem?
Well, the biologists knew this was a flaw. They had to assume, based on test netting and observation, that the majority of migrating salmon hug the banks.
Oh, to avoid the strongest currents in the middle?
Exactly. The fastest, steepest current is in the middle, so the fish stay near the edges. So they placed the 100-foot beam near the shore and just hoped they were capturing the bulk of the migration.
Just hoped. Wow.
But the range wasn't even its biggest flaw.
Wait, what was worse than only seeing a fraction of the river?
The processing. The Bendix was incredibly simplistic in how it handled the acoustic data.
I mean,
It literally just counted echoes. It fired a ping, and if it heard a strong enough echo bounce back, presumably from a swim bladder, it registered a hit.
just a hit.
Right. If a fish crossed that 30-meter beam, the machine clicked. A mechanical tally advanced by one. And that was essentially it.
Okay, stop right there. If it's just counting blips, just a simple click every time an echo bounces back, how did they know what they were counting?
That is exactly the million-dollar question.
Like, how did they know the blip was a highly prized king salmon returning to spawn and not just a drifting waterlogged tree branch tumbling along the bottom?
And the terrifying answer for a biologist managing a quota is they didn't know.
They just guessed.
They had to. The Bendix could not tell you the direction the object was moving. It could not tell you if the echo belonged to a strong upstream spawner fighting the current or a piece of debris drifting passively downstream.
That's a huge problem.
Or, think about this, what happens if a fish gets tired? Salmon migrating upstream often stop to rest.
Right.
What if a fish is just milling about, swimming in circles in front of the transducer?
Oh, wow. If a fish is swimming in circles in the beam, the machine is just going click, 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 click.
Exactly. One fish becomes 10 fish in the data.
And it gets worse, right?
It does. The Bendix could not tell you the size of the target. It couldn't distinguish a massive 40-pound king salmon from a much smaller 6-pound pink salmon.
So it was just a crude, raw tally in the absolute dark.
Well, a very crude tally.
A turnstile in the dark. That is wild to think about.
Yeah.
Entire commercial fisheries, the livelihoods of these coastal communities, the strict spate quotas, they were all built on a metal box that just went click.
Yeah, pretty much.
And it left the exhausted biologist sitting in a tent on the riverbank to basically guess what triggered it.
I mean, it built the foundation, yes, but it was a very shaky foundation. It was the best available technology for a long time, but the agency was acutely aware of its blind spots.
They must have been so stressed out.
Oh, the sheer compounding anxiety of not knowing which way the fish were actually traveling, whether they were actually making it upriver to propagate the species or just drifting backward, it made it glaringly obvious that they needed a major evolutionary leap.
And they desperately needed to know the physical path of the fish.
Exactly. They needed to see the movement.
Which perfectly sets up the next era of our deep dive.
Yeah.
We move beyond the simple blind click of the Bendix and enter the era of split beam sonar.
Yes, the split beam.
So if the problem was not knowing direction, how did split beam change the game?
Split beam sonar was a massive revelation in hydroacoustics. Instead of a single flat receiver just waiting for a generic bounce to come back, the split beam system physically split the receiving face of the transducer into 4 distinct quadrants or sections.
Okay, so it's like having 4 separate ears listening at once.
Precisely. Because the receiver was split, when an echo bounced off a fish's swim bladder and returned to the machine, the sound wave wouldn't hit all 4 quadrants at the exact same microsecond.
Get this coming from a specific angle.
Right. Depending on where the fish was in the beam, the echo would hit the top left quadrant a tiny fraction of a millisecond before it hit the bottom right quadrant.
Okay.
By carefully comparing these microscopic delays, what they call phase differencing, the computer behind the scenes could actually triangulate the target in 3-dimensional space.
Okay, let me try to map this to something familiar. So wait, if they have multiple receivers analyzing the micro delays in sound, is this exactly how human hearing works?
It is very similar, yes.
Like, if you are deaf in one ear, you can hear a car honk, but you have no idea where it is. But with 2 ears, your brain calculates the tiny delay between the sound hitting your left ear versus your right ear.
Right.
And suddenly you have stereo hearing. You know the car is to your left, and you know if it's driving toward you or away from you.
That is a phenomenal analogy. Split beam is exactly like gaining stereo hearing in the muddy river.
That must have been a huge relief for them.
Oh, massive. Because of this triangulation, the split beam sonar wasn't just registering a click anymore. It could plot the fish's location multiple times a second as it swam through the beam.
So it could track it.
It could draw a moving trace or a track on a computer screen. It was a line showing movement over time.
So it completely solved the directionality problem.
Completely. Finally, a biologist looking at the data could definitively say, look at this trace. This object is moving steadily upstream against the current at 3 feet per second.
That is definitely a salmon.
Right. And this other trace over here is moving downstream at the exact speed of the water current. That is a piece of debris.
That alone must have been just a monumental relief. You can finally stop counting drifting logs as salmon.
Exactly.
But what about the range? Did it fix the 100-foot blind spot?
It did, and what is fascinating here is the sheer raw power of the split beam. While the Bendix was effectively blind past 30 meters, the split beam sonar operates at a slightly lower frequency.
Which means what?
It allows the sound to punch through the water much further without losing energy. It has a massive reach, roughly 300 meters or about 985 feet.
Wow. Nearly 1,000 feet of stereo hearing in wet cement. That is incredible.
It is. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of Alaskan geography, that immense reach is incredibly relevant. In fact, it is why split beam technology is actually still used today, right now, on the Yukon River.
Wait, really? Even with the newer tech we are about to discuss?
Yes, even today.
Why stick with the older split beam?
Because of the geography. The Yukon is notoriously wide. It is highly braided with different massive channels that has deep drop-offs, and in many places, it is simply too vast for the modern, shorter-range imaging technologies.
Oh, I see.
At 2 specific counting sites on the Yukon, the river is just too wide. So the state still absolutely relies on the raw, long-range power of split-beam sonar just to reach across the immense water column.
They need that 1,000-foot acoustic flashlight.
They do. They have to have it.
But there is still a catch, right? Even with this incredible range, and even with the ability to track the path and rule out debris, what is the split beam still missing?
Well, you can probably guess.
It sounds like they still don't know exactly what they're looking at.
You've hit the exact limitation. It is missing the portrait. The split beam draws a trace, a line of movement. You know a fish went upstream.
Right.
But the split beam cannot reliably tell you the physical length of the fish, and therefore it cannot tell you the species. You have the path, but not the identity.
So you don't know if that trace was a massive 50-pound king salmon or a much smaller 8-pound sockeye.
Exactly.
A track, not a portrait. So you know the fish is there, but you don't know if it's the specific fish the entire commercial fleet is waiting to catch.
Which is a huge issue for management.
So to actually see the fish, to get that high-definition portrait, fisheries biologists hit a wall. They had to look outside their own field entirely.
They did. The leap in technology didn't come from a fisheries department. It came from the military.
This is where the story gets so cool. We are moving into the late 1990s and early 2000s. Talk to me about the arrival of a technology called DIDSON.
DIDSON. It stands for Dual Frequency Identification Sonar. And you're correct. Its origins have absolutely nothing to do with salmon.
Where did it come from?
It originated at the University of Washington's Applied Physics Laboratory. It was originally designed under military contracts, specifically for the U.S. Navy.
What was the Navy trying to look for?
They were trying to detect underwater mines, specifically limpet mines attached to the hulls of ships and enemy divers swimming in dark, murky, highly turbid harbors.
Wow. So the military had the exact same, we can't see anything in this muddy water problem that the Alaskan biologists had.
Exactly, just with much higher explosive stakes.
Yeah, no kidding.
Harbors are often just as murky as the Kenai River. And the solution the engineers at the Applied Physics Lab came up with was entirely revolutionary.
Oh, so.
Instead of firing one single beam of sound like the Bendix, or even a split beam with 4 quadrants, the DIDSON fires a horizontal fan of many, many intensely narrow beams of sound simultaneously.
Okay.
Depending on the mode, it typically fires 48 or 96 individual acoustic beams.
Okay, let's slow down and picture this. So instead of sweeping one wide floodlight into the dark, it's like taking a fan of 96 individual laser pointers, all stacked tightly next to each other,
Yeah.
and shining them all at once.
Yes, that's it. And think of each of those 96 narrow acoustic beams acting as a single vertical column of pixels on a digital screen.
Oh, wow.
Because the beams are so tightly packed together and because the DIDSON machine pulses and refreshes these sound waves multiple times every single second, it essentially stitches together high-resolution imagery.
Video.
It creates something incredibly close to actual black and white video footage.
Video from sound.
Exactly. When you look at a DIDSON screen, you aren't looking at a generic blip, and you aren't looking at a mathematical line trace. You can actually see the dark, unmistakable silhouette of a salmon wriggling upstream.
That is just science fiction level incredible.
It is amazing to watch. The background of the riverbed appears bright on the screen, and the fish absorbs and blocks some of the sound, creating a shadow.
So you see the shadow moving against the bright background.
Right. You can literally see the shape of the head. You can see their tails actively beating back and forth in a sine wave as they fight the current.
In pitch black, freezing, muddy water, where you can't see your own hand, you are getting a live video feed of a fish's tail beating. That is staggering.
It completely changed the game.
But there's a trade-off, isn't there?
Yeah.
What is the range on something like this? Because if it takes that much energy to make video, it can't shoot 1,000 feet like the split beam.
You are absolutely right. In its wider 48 beam mode, the practical range of the DIDSON is around 164 feet.
Okay, that's a lot shorter.
Yeah, so it sacrifices the massive 1,000-foot reach of the older split beam in exchange for stunning high-definition clarity close-up.
Okay, so wait. The name is Dual Frequency Identification Sonar. Why dual? Let me think this through.
Go ahead.
If they have 2 frequencies, is that just like having a wide floodlight to find the deer at the edge of your yard in the dark and then switching to a highly focused laser pointer to see the details of the antlers once you know where it is?
You've got the exact physics of it. That is the cleverness of the DIDSON system, and it relies on how sound attenuates or loses energy in water.
Okay, explain that.
Lower frequency sound waves vibrate slower, so they lose less energy to the water as they travel. They can travel much further, so you use them for detection at a distance.
Like this lead light?
Right, but shorter wavelengths, higher frequencies, which for DIDSON is around 1.8 megahertz, they vibrate incredibly fast.
So they see more detail.
They resolve much finer detail, much like a fine-tipped pen draws a sharper line than a thick, permanent marker.
But they lose energy faster.
Exactly. The high-frequency waves get absorbed by the water and scatter much faster. So the operator of the DIDSON has a choice.
They can switch back and forth.
Yes. They can toggle to the lower frequency to reach out to 164 feet to see if fish are passing by. And if a target approaches, they can switch to the high-frequency 1.8 megahertz mode to see incredibly sharp detail, but only out to about 40 or 50 feet.
This sounds amazing in theory.
Yeah.
But if I'm a skeptical veteran fisheries manager in Alaska being pitched this $1 million piece of military hardware, I'm not just going to take the Navy's word for it.
No, you shouldn't.
I'm going to say, prove to me that this shadowy digital video feed actually matches the biological reality of my river. How did they validate that a shadow on a screen equals a real physical fish?
That validation process is a crucial piece of the history. In 2006, a pivotal foundational study was published in the ICA's Journal of Marine Science.
Okay.
It was by a researcher named Holmes and his colleagues. They didn't just guess or trust the manufacturer. They ran a rigorous, undeniable scientific validation.
How did they do it?
They deployed a DIDSON system right next to a physical fish-counting fence in a river.
Okay, let's explain what that is for everyone. A fish-counting fence, or a weir, is exactly what it sounds like. It is a physical metal fence placed entirely across a smaller stream. Humans actually stand there, trap the fish, handle them, and manually click a counter for every single physical fish that passes through a gate.
Right.
It is an absolute, undeniable true census. You cannot argue with a weir count because the fish is literally in your hands.
Right. It is the gold standard of counting. So Holmes and his research team compared the manual physical count from the human beings at the fence with the automated count derived from the DIDSON imagery watching the exact same stretch of water.
Did it match?
The results were astounding. It matched beautifully.
Wow.
They found near-perfect one-to-one agreement between the DIDSON acoustic shadows and the physical fish counted by the humans.
That is so cool.
And this held true even when they were tracking massive chaotic migration events of over 900 fish passing the camera at once.
That proves it then.
It did. The study proved definitively to the scientific community that this imaging count could be trusted. A picture painted in sound waves was just as reliable as a physical count in daylight.
So seeing the fish in the dark was revolutionary. The military tech worked. It changed the game.
Big time.
But from what we know about the prized Alaskan king salmon, the Chinook managers needed more than just a head count, right?
Yeah, head count wasn't enough.
They didn't just need to know a fish was there. They needed one more critical piece of data that even the DIDSON struggled to perfect.
Right.
They needed exact millimeter accurate size. And that brings us to the next evolution. Let's talk about the ARIS system and sizing up the king in the shadows.
Yes. The DIDSON was a massive breakthrough, but technology never stops pushing forward.
Of course not.
In 2012, a new acoustic camera system was first tested in Alaska. It is the direct successor to DIDSON, built by the exact same company, Sound Metrics Corporation. It is called ARIS, which stands for Adaptive Resolution Imaging Sonar.
So if DIDSON was already giving them video, what does ARIS do that DIDSON couldn't?
ARIS pushes the high-frequency imaging even further into the extreme. The imagery is sharper, the software is more adjustable, and according to the manufacturer's specs, top models of the ARIS can push frequencies up to a staggering 3.0 megahertz.
3.0 megahertz. So going back to our analogy, if DIDSON was a fine-tipped pen, ARIS is like a surgical scalpel.
Exactly. And that extra surgical resolution unlocks the single most consequential capability in modern fisheries, sonar. The ability to accurately and consistently measure the physical length of a swimming fish.
Measure its length.
Yes. From the tip of its nose to the fork of its tail, based entirely on its acoustic shadow.
Measuring a squirming, swimming fish that you can't even see using sound.
It is remarkable, and the scientific foundation for trusting these measurements was laid by a 2010 study by a researcher named Berwin and her colleagues. They published in the Transactions of the American Fisheries Society. They did exhaustive testing and proved that biological length could be accurately read from these high-definition sonar images.
And that changes everything.
It completely changed how rivers, specifically highly contested rivers like the Kenai, are managed today. Today, ARIS is specifically used to flag king salmon out of the massive runs of other fish.
But with a specific metric, right?
Yes. The computer software is looking for kings that are exactly 34 inches or larger in total length.
I saw that exact number highlighted multiple times in the research notes.
Yeah.
Why exactly 34 inches? Why is that the magic dividing line for a king salmon?
It all comes down to the biology of the different salmon species mingling in the river. You have massive runs of sockeye salmon, sometimes numbering in the millions, swimming right alongside the king salmon.
Right.
The problem is sockeye simply do not grow that large. The biological ceiling for a sockeye is generally under 34 inches.
Okay, so that's the cutoff.
Therefore, 34 inches is the exact biological and technological threshold where the imaging sonar can reliably distinguish the species.
So if a fish passes through the ARIS beam, and the software measures its acoustic shadow at 34 inches or bigger, the biologists know with absolute 100% certainty that target is a king salmon.
That is a king. Exactly.
Wow. That is a distinction the old clicking Bendix machine couldn't even dream of making.
Never.
And the tracing split beam could never achieve.
Not a chance.
Okay, I really want to visualize how they actually set this up on the river today, because relying on this strict 34-inch metric means the acoustic setup has to be absolutely flawless. You can't miss an inch.
You really can't.
So walk us through the modern choreography. Take the famous Kenai River Mile 14 site. What does that actually look like on the ground?
It is a massive, complex piece of engineering choreography.
Yeah.
That River Mile 14 on the Kenai, they don't just toss one transducer in the water and hope for the best.
I would hope not.
They deploy 5 separate ARIS sonar arrays.
5 of them working together.
Yes. They have metal scaffolds built into the riverbed, divers in dry suits making sure the angles are perfect, and they overlap these 5 acoustic cameras to span nearly the entire width of the mighty Kenai River.
That sounds incredibly expensive. Why do they need 5?
The reason is critical for data accuracy. By spanning the whole river with overlapping beams, they eliminate the need for what biologists call expansion factors.
What is an expansion factor?
In the past, at older sites with narrower beams, biologists could only see a small portion of the river, say, the 100 feet closest to the bank.
Right, like we talked about with the Bendix.
Right. They would count the fish they saw in that 100 feet. But they knew fish were swimming in the middle of the river, too, so they had to use statistical math expansion factors to guess how many fish likely slipped past them in the blind spots.
Okay, so if they counted 100 fish on the bank, the math model might say, well, based on past data, there are probably another 50 fish in the middle.
Exactly. So the official count becomes 150.
Ah. You are expanding the known data to cover the unknown. But that means you are essentially guessing.
It's an educated, statistically valid guess, but yes, it involved extrapolation. With 5 ARIS arrays acting as a continuous fence across the river, they aren't guessing anymore.
They just see it all.
They're watching almost the entire water column. If a fish passes, it gets recorded.
Okay, but wait. I'm thinking about the biology here.
Okay.
Earlier you said the 34-inch rule works for large kings because sockeye don't get that big.
Right.
But kings aren't born 34 inches long. What about a smaller, younger king salmon? Like a 3-year-old king returning from the ocean that is only 28 inches long.
That is a very good question.
The sonar can measure its length perfectly, but it's the exact same size as a sockeye. How does the camera know which is which?
This is exactly where the pristine, high-tech digital story crashes right back into cold, wet, muddy reality. You have hit on the exact flaw.
Oh, really?
The sonar still cannot definitively determine species for small fish. It can only tell you their length.
So a 28-inch king and a 28-inch sockeye look identical.
They look identical as acoustic shadows. Therefore, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game cannot rely solely on the machine.
What do?
They have to supplement this incredible sci-fi acoustic data with a very traditional, very human method, physical test netting.
Boots on the ground, skiffs in the water.
Precisely. While the ARIS is counting everything, the department has crews physically netting samples of the run every single day.
That sounds like a lot of work.
It is. They catch 100 fish, manually identify them, and figure out the exact daily ratio of small kings to sockeye.
Oh, I see.
So if the nets showed that 5% of the small fish are kings, they apply that 5% ratio to the thousands of small shadows recorded by the ARIS.
That is fascinating. So the final official state count is never just a clean computer readout. It is a composite.
Exactly. It is a blend of acoustic shadows, physical nets, and human biological judgment about how to best combine those completely different data sets.
And that reality is the absolute hinge point of our deep dive today. Because whenever you combine invisible sound waves with physical nets, it requires human judgment and human statistical models.
It does.
And whenever you introduce human judgment into a high-stakes, highly emotional economic environment, that is exactly where public trust can completely break down.
Oh, it creates immense friction.
Which brings us to the human fallout.
Oh.
Let's talk about the contested numbers and what happens when the digital data just doesn't add up for the people who actually live and work on the river.
To really understand this controversy, we have to look at what historically happens when a river's management shifts its foundational technology.
Okay, what usually happens?
When an agency switches from one counting method, say an old physical weir on a tributary or an aging Bendix sonar, over to a brand new multi-million-dollar acoustic camera system, the official count almost always shifts.
The baseline moves.
Baseline moves. The machine sees things the old machine missed or interprets things differently.
And when the baseline moves, the people whose entire livelihoods depend on that baseline notice immediately.
Oh, yeah.
If the state says the count is too low, the commercial boats can't go out, the sport guides have to cancel clients, mortgages don't get paid.
It's serious business.
Let's dig into the specific flashpoint that our sources highlight. Walk us through exactly what happened on the Kenai River in the summer of 2013 during the early run king salmon count.
In 2013, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game officially moved their primary sonar counting operation to that new, expansive River Mile 14 site we just discussed.
The one with the 5 cameras.
Right. They were utilizing the new, highly accurate imaging technology. At the end of the early run, they released their official count for the king salmon based on the mainstem sonar.
Okay, what was the number?
The number they published was exactly 2,038 kings.
Okay, 2,038 large kings counted by the multi-million-dollar acoustic cameras. That sounds incredibly precise. But where did it all go wrong?
It went wrong miles upstream.
Upstream.
While the state was running the sonar on the main massive artery of the river, a different agency, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, was running physical counting weirs on the smaller tributaries that feed into the Kenai.
Those are the literal metal fences we discussed earlier where humans handle every fish.
Right, the physical census. And the tributary weir counts reported approximately 1,881 king salmon passing into the Kili River.
Okay.
And another 1,027 kings passing into the Funny River.
Okay, let's just do the raw math here because this is where anyone with a calculator would absolutely lose their mind.
Go for it.
Wait. 1,881 fish physically counted in one tributary plus 1,027 in another. That is 2,908 fish.
That's right.
That is nearly 3,000 fish physically, undeniably counted in just the smaller side streams. But the state's main river sonar, the fancy camera that all of those fish had to swim past to get to those tributaries in the first place, only saw 2,038 fish total.
That is the exact mathematical discrepancy that caused an absolute uproar in the community.
Imagine you are running a guide business on the Kenai. Your entire summer income relies on the state allowing you to take clients out to catch kings. The state tells you the run is low, only 2,000 fish, and restricts your fishing. But you look at the tributary data and see 3,000 fish.
You'd be furious.
You are going to point at that new, expensive sonar site and scream, you know, your fancy machine is broken.
Yeah.
You are undercounting the run, and you are bankrupting my business based on bad computer data.
And that is a perfectly logical, deeply understandable reaction from their perspective. The town hall meetings were intense.
I can imagine.
But if we connect this to the underlying science, we have to impartially break down why these numbers disagreed so violently.
Okay, explain that discrepancy for us. How can the main river have fewer fish than the branches?
It comes down to the fundamental difference between the two instruments and the environments they operate in. A weir, placed on a small, narrow tributary stream, is a near-total census. The water is shallow, the space is highly confined, and you are physically stopping and counting almost every single fish. There are very few variables.
Okay.
The main stem sonar, however, despite having 5 arrays and incredible imaging, is still operating on a massive, deep, turbulent, mile-wide river.
With lots of variables.
Exactly. It relies on the test nets to proportion out the small kings. It relies on software to interpret the shadows. It is, at its core, a highly advanced statistical estimate.
So Fishing Game's essentially saying, you know, the sonar is doing its job perfectly, but it's measuring a vastly different scale of environment with different variables than a tiny stream fence.
Exactly. They defended the ARIS technology vigorously. They knew the physics were sound.
But the numbers still look bad.
Right. They also recognized the glaring discrepancy. In fact, in 2013, they actually held back some of the data from the new site for further vetting, acknowledging that the transition between counting methods required deep, complex analysis of the statistical trends.
That makes sense scientifically.
But for the public, the damage to trust was already done. This clash forced a massive, highly public debate about which instrument to believe and who actually controls the narrative of the river.
This mathematical discrepancy basically opened the floodgates for deep structural skepticism from the people who know the river best.
It really did.
We've talked a lot about the technology, but let's talk about the local knowledge versus this centralized tech. Who are the specific voices pushing back, and what exactly are they pointing out?
We have several prominent voices raising legitimate, scientifically grounded concerns, and it's incredibly important to note they aren't just angry people with no expertise.
Okay, who are they?
For example, Dwight Kramer from the Kenai Area Fishermen's Coalition. His concern is deeply tied to the physical geography of the sonar placement.
What's his argument?
He worries that the sonar, sitting at River Mile 14, simply doesn't account for the massive amount of fish that are harvested downstream in the ocean or the lower river before they ever reach the acoustic camera. Okay. That makes complete sense. If commercial nets or sport fishermen catch 1,000 kings at River Mile 5, those dead fish obviously never swim past the camera at Mile 14.
Right. And Kramer's argument is that if the state is only managing the health of the river based on the fish that cross the sonar line, They might be systematically undercounting the total pressure on the run.
They are ignoring the fish that were already removed.
Exactly. It's a critique of the system's geographic limitations, not necessarily the camera itself.
It's a massive blind spot in the model. What about the scientific community? Are there biologists pushing back against the state's biologists?
Yes. Ken Tarbox, a former state research biologist himself, brings a different, more philosophical critique to the table.
What does he say?
He cautions against what we might call the magnetism of technology.
Magnetism of technology, what does that mean?
His argument is that obsessing over generating a single, perfect, highly digitized, reliable count from a high-tech machine inevitably pulls focus. And more importantly, it pulls limited state funding away from other crucial scientific work. Oh, I see. What kind of work is being ignored?
Studying the actual habitat, monitoring the health of the spawning grounds up in the mountains, studying the life history of the juvenile salmon before they go to the ocean, analyzing shifting water temperatures.
All the big picture stuff.
Right? Tarbox warns that having a perfect millimeter-accurate count of returning adults doesn't save a species if their spawning habitat is being paved over or warming up, but the million-dollar camera program eats up all the departmental budget.
It's the old losing the forest for the trees argument, but with salmon. It's a brilliant point. But beyond the funding and the geographic location, are the fishermen also pointing out actual technical flaws in the ARIS system itself? Do these acoustic cameras have physical blind spots?
Absolutely. The local guides and fishermen spend 300 days a year on this water. They are incredibly observant.
Right.
They point out that no matter how good the camera is, a wild river is chaotic. They argue the sonar might be missing fish that hug the extremely shallow far banks, completely out of the acoustic beam's angle.
Or what about between the cameras?
Yes, they worry about fish slipping directly behind the metal transducers, or swimming in the tiny, unmonitored gaps between the 5 different arrays.
And what about that strict 34-inch measurement rule? We know the physics work, but does it ever fail in practice?
This is a major, ongoing technical point of contention. The length accuracy of the ARIS system is incredible in a laboratory setting, but it degrades the further out the acoustic beam travels.
Because of the high-frequency scattering.
Exactly. High-frequency scatter. Once you get towards the outer edges of the beam, say around 100 feet out, the resolution drops slightly. Furthermore, the mathematical software assumes the fish is swimming perfectly broadside, perfectly perpendicular to the sound wave, presenting its full profile to the camera.
But a wild fish fighting a heavy current isn't going to swim in a perfect robotic straight line. It's going to twist and turn and dart around boulders.
Exactly. If the fish is swimming at an angle relative to the transducer, its acoustic shadow on the screen appears shorter than its actual physical body. So if a massive 36-inch king salmon swims through the beam at a sharp 45-degree angle, the computer might measure its shortened shadow as only 32 inches.
And suddenly, that highly prized king is officially recorded by the state as a sockeye.
It vanishes from the king count entirely?
Imagine being a guide knowing that a huge king just swam by, but the computer called it a sockeye because it wiggled.
Okay.
So what does this all mean? It means that seeing better upgrading from a blind Bendix turnstile to a high-definition ARIS acoustic camera doesn't actually end the argument on the river.
It really doesn't.
It doesn't magically solve the tension, it just shifts the argument. The debate moves from, are we counting the right echoes, to who controls the machine, where is it placed, and how do we interpret the digital shadows it produces.
Exactly.
It highlights this incredible ongoing tension between traditional, boots-on-the-ground intuition from people who know the water intimately and centralized high-tech algorithms deployed by the state.
It is a profound shift in power, really. The ultimate authority over the reality of the river has been outsourced to a machine. And while the machine is scientifically validated and incredibly impressive, the river is inherently messy. Human trust requires more than just a peer-reviewed paper on acoustic impedance.
This brings us toward the end of our journey today, but it actually sets up an even more massive problem that we haven't even touched on yet.
Yeah, the real bottleneck.
Because we haven't even talked about the biggest logistical nightmare of this whole system.
No, we haven't. And this leads us right to the lingering bottleneck, which we will be exploring fully in our next deep dive. The DIDSON and ARIS systems are absolute marvels of engineering, but we have to remember one crucial, crippling fact about how they operate.
What's that?
They do not actually count fish.
Wait, What do you mean they don't count? We just spent an hour talking about fish counting sonar.
They don't count, they record, they generate raw imagery.
Ah, I see.
Currently, across the 15 sonar sites run by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, 14 of them are producing a staggering, almost unimaginable 247 torrent of high-definition sonar imagery.
247 video.
Yes. For years, all this multi-million-dollar technology did was generate thousands upon thousands of hours of black and white static video files.
Oh my God. The data storage alone. So who?
What?
How did they actually get the daily numbers to manage the fishery?
Historically, a human being, usually a seasonal technician or a junior biologist, had to sit in a dark room, staring at a computer monitor, watching hundreds of hours of this echogram footage.
You're kidding.
They had to manually click a button on a keyboard every single time a shadow wiggled across the screen.
That is an impossible bottleneck.
Yeah.
We spent millions of dollars, we borrowed classified military technology, and we spent decades of rigorous scientific research to build machines that can see perfectly in the dark. And we're still relying on tired, highly caffeinated human eyes to watch the video and manually count what the machines see.
It's absurd when you think about it.
It's like building the Hubble Space Telescope, pointing it at a new galaxy, and then having an intern sketch what it sees with a charcoal pencil.
That's a great way to put it. It is an entirely unsustainable volume of data. The biological phenomenon of echogram fatigue, where the human eye simply stops registering the shadows after hours of staring at static, is a real threat to the data's accuracy.
I bet.
And that is exactly why the next frontier of fisheries biology isn't about building better cameras. It is about artificial intelligence.
AI. Yeah.
It is about training complex machine learning software to watch those 247 feeds, identify the species, measure the length, and pull the true count out of the shadows automatically without human intervention.
Which leaves us with a lot to think about. We started this deep dive staring down into the freezing wet cement of an Alaskan river. We spent decades trying to remove human error by building better, sharper machines to see into that dark water. We've gone from blind mechanical clicks to stereo traces to high-definition acoustic shadows.
It's an amazing journey.
But as we prepare to hand over the final tally, the ultimate authority of the wild river, to these digital eyes and the AI algorithms that will soon read them, I want to leave you with a thought to mull over on your own.
As we perfect the technology, are we actually capturing the true, messy, chaotic pulse of the river? Or are we just measuring the portion of nature that perfectly fits inside our technology's frame?
That's the big question.
What happens to the fish that refuse to swim straight, that hug the shallow banks, that swim behind the camera? What happens to the life that defies the algorithm?
That is the ultimate defining question of modern environmental science. As our tools get sharper, we have to make sure our understanding of the ecosystem doesn't narrow.
So true. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden acoustic world of the salmon run. We've explored the fascinating physics of sound, the history of the technology, and the profound human friction that happens when a digital machine tries to map a wild, untamed ecosystem. We'll see you next time.